In this clip, we're going to learn how to cycle an animation an infinite amount. Alright, so we have a brand new scene open up here, and you can find this scene within your project files. And what we're going to be doing is creating a ball bounce from scratch and cycling it so that we can basically just have it bounce continually as long as we want. So before we begin, what we're going to do is adjust some of the animation preferences here, like our timeline. So we want to actually change the amount of frames that we have in our animation. So we're going to check this box here and change it to a value of 17. We're going to go to our animation preferences. We'll bring up this window. We want to go to the animation category. Auto key, you can see, is turned on, which is what we want. And one quick thing that I wanted to note is that you can change the tangent type before you actually begin animating. So as we learned about, we can easily just change the tangent type to something like auto or linear or step tangents if we want to by simply selecting the curve and changing it in the graph editor, or we can change it before we begin animating so that anytime we create a keyframe, it's automatically going to set it to that specific tangent type that we have set here. So by default, it's going to be set to auto. But we could go in here to the default out tangent and do something like stepped if we are blocking an animation. So it's important to know that you do have that ability here. Now this option right here of the weighted tangents, currently it's checked, and it should be checked by default. And what this does is, with it checked, it's going to actually give us the ability, like we learned in the previous clip, to actually shrink and stretch our tangent handles to alter the shape of a curve. With this unchecked, it's going to completely remove that ability even if we free the tangent weight. So that's something really important to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and hit save. And we'll begin creating our ball bounce animation. So the first thing we're going to do is select our main control curve here. And we'll just translate this ball up in space. And we might bring it to a value of around 20. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to add some squash and stretch in here. You can see we have the controls to do it. So we're going to shift select all three control curves, and then we're going to press S because we want to lock a keyframe down on all of those controls. And then we'll go to frame 9, take our main control, bring it to a value of 0 to bring it back to the floor. And again, we have auto key turned on, so it automatically added a keyframe. But for our squash controls, if we shift select both of those, it hasn't added a keyframe because that value hasn't changed. So we still need to do that on our end. So we'll press S. All right, then we'll go to frame 17, bring this back to a value of 20 on translate Y for the main control, and then keyframe the squash controls as well. The reason we want to do that is because when you're cycling an animation, you want to make sure that your first frame and your last frame are exactly the same. So if we play this, since we only are viewing the exact amount of keyframes that we have in our timeline, we'll get a nice cycle. But since we don't have all of the animations, all the frames displayed in my timeline, if we wanted to have this ball bounce more than it is currently, just one single bounce, we couldn't do that because if we added more keyframes in here, just frames, let's just bring this to a value of 30, you can see that it's going to stop. So if we bring that to 30, it's going to go to the frame 17 and then stop. So we're going to need to cycle this. So let's bring that back to maybe a value of 17 just for now. Let's go ahead and first adjust the curve on this bounce. You can see we're getting that very strange motion of it slowing down before it hits the ground. So let's very quickly just to change that. We'll select our main control, go to Window, Animation Editor. Let's open up the graph editor. And then we'll select the Translate Y. And we'll select the keyframe down here at the bottom on frame 9. We'll bring this curve in, that tangent handle in. Select the tangent handle at the first frame, bring that out, just like we learned about in the previous clip. Bring this tangent handle out, and that's going to give us a really nice bouncing motion to our ball. You can see it there. All right, great. So let's go ahead, and we'll just hide the graph editor for now. Let's add some squash and stretch to this. So we'll first focus on the bottom squash control. So what we'll do is, let's see here. Let's go ahead and set a keyframe on frame 6 because we want to hold the value of 0 on the translate Y, the up and down motion. We want to go to frame 8 and bring this ball and stretch it out quite a bit to something like that. So the ball begins to stretch as it falls to the ground. At frame 9, it's going to zero back out. Now we want to take this top control. We'll go to frame 8. We want to lock a keyframe down on frame 8 so that it holds the value of 0. We want to go to frame 9, and we'll bring this down to squash it. So now you can see we're getting a really nice squash. Let's go to frame let's go to frame 10. We'll stretch it out, and we might even stretch the bottom one out just slightly. So now we're getting a really nice pop up. And then on this top control, what we'll do is maybe go to around a value of 13 there on the frame, and then change the translate Y to 0 on the squash to bring that back out. And then on this bottom control, what we might actually do is bring this up and actually squash it just a little bit. And what this is going to do is give us a really nice sort of squishy feel and bounce as it travels back up. So if we play this, you can see we're getting a really nice sort of jiggle at the top of the arc, sort of just a really fun cartoony style of animation utilizing these squash controls. All right, so now if we want to actually have this animation continue on for as long as we want, we need to actually cycle this in the graph editor. So let's go ahead and pause this. And maybe let's add 120 frames to our actual frame count. So we'll bring both of those values to 120 there. And if we play this again, you can see it's going to stop. So let's bring up our graph editor. I just have it currently minimized here. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to shift select all of our control curves. So all 3 of them there. And then we'll drag a marquee selection around our keyframes. Then we're going to go up here to curves. We're going to choose pre-infinity, and we're just going to choose cycle. And what this is going to do is simply just cycle the actual animation itself and just repeat it. So we'll do that. Now you can see that we don't really see a change in our animation, and that's simply because we need to go over here to the View menu, and we just need to turn the visibility of the infinity curve on. So you can see, since we went over here to curves pre-infinity, it's basically cycling it sort of backwards to more of a negative value in our animation. Now we need to continue it forward. So let's go to curves post-infinity, so the last keyframe in our animation, and we'll choose cycle. And now what we're getting is a perfect cycle to our animation in just a few seconds by utilizing that pre-infinity and post-infinity cycle for our curve itself. So you can see just how easy that was to basically create one single bounce for your ball and then just cycle it to kind of just have it continually bounce and have a really nice, fun, cartoony style of animation. If you want to, you can bring this graph editor up and sort of just experiment with some of these other cycling options that you have. For example, things like oscillate, what it'll do is basically animate forward, cycle it forward, and then cycle it sort of in reverse, just like the oscillate option was for when we wanted to play or loop the playback in the actual timeline itself. So it's very similar to that. So you can play around with these post-infinity and pre-infinity cycling options. We'll go ahead and just close that. So you can get a really good look at a way you can very easily just cycle an animation an infinite amount. Let's go ahead and we can just pause that now. So now that we've learned about Maya's graph editor, in the next module, we're going to learn about Maya 2017's new time editor tool. So we'll learn all about that in the next module.